What comes to mind when you hear the sound of an air raid siren? Does your mind immediately imagine World War II bombing raids? Or the threat of nuclear war? Or perhaps you think of Silent Hill? The sound is pretty ingrained into that series. If you were to ask me that question, I'd think of all three. But there's one other gaming series that comes to mind before any of them. I cannot stop thinking about Resistance lately. I hear that iconic siren sound, and it activates me like I'm some kind of sleeper agent. Then all the memories come flooding back, along with the bewilderment I feel towards its legacy, or lack thereof. I genuinely cannot understand Sony's neglect of their PS3 era franchises, and then they have the gall to act like they don't have enough original IP. I mentioned PS3 era specifically because unlike the PS2 games, which can be emulated relatively simply, PS3 emulation is taking forever to crack because of the complex architecture of that console, a mistake Sony is still paying for to this day. We'll likely never see PS3 emulation on the PS5, so if you have a PS3 and want to experience or re-experience the likes of MotorStorm, Little Big Planet, Killzone 3, Infamous 1 and 2, and all three of my beloved Resistance games, you're out of luck, Chief. I know having a hefty PC can emulate some of those, but unless you're already a die-hard fan with a decent PC, you're not going to seek those titles out. What I'm talking about is a convenient way for the masses to get their hands on these games, new and old fans alike. I'm particularly heated about this because my last working PS3 recently kicked the bucket, and it's caused me to reflect on Sony's disrespect for legacy. God knows the execs have had some baffling takes about past games over the years. I'm no business strategist, obviously, but instead of bleeding millions upon millions of dollars over half-baked live service games and closing talented studios, how about immortalizing the dormant IP you already own? Allow them to escape from PS3 jail so that they can be played in any future PS system, including handhelds. Then, you can strengthen the Sony brand by bragging about all these titles you have, perhaps even win over some new fans that didn't get a chance to play them back then. Boom. Now you have more incentive to own a PlayStation in this day and age. If they don't want to risk doing new entries to these old franchises, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying they should milk their franchises when the passion isn't there, but to completely abandon them to old hardware for nothing? Who exactly wins from that? The fans don't win, the studios that develop them don't win, and Sony definitely doesn't win, especially in the long term. Anyway, I'll stop ranting about that and get to the actual meat and potatoes of this video. Why do I feel Resistance deserves a comeback more than any franchises of this era? Well, firstly, it's one of two series where each mainline entry was developed for the PS3 exclusively. It never continued into the PS4 era. Secondly, Resistance Fall of Man represents a defining moment in my childhood. It was the first game I ever owned from the PS3. In fact, I was gifted the game by my parents before I even owned the console. They had ordered a PS3 along with the game, but the game arrived first. I didn't even know I was getting a PS3, so this was absolutely mind-blowing for me at the time. This brilliant front cover was so simple, yet so powerful. Side note, whoever's in charge of the artwork of the series deserves a ridiculous amount of praise. Just look at the cover art for all three games. This was the type of cover art that you stare at in GameStop for long periods of time when you couldn't afford to buy anything. Before Modern Warfare swept the world, Resistance was my real introduction to the first-person shooter, complete with split-screen co-op and online multiplayer, which I didn't get to try until years later, but still. However, being a dumbass kid meant that naturally, I only appreciated the surface-level aspects of the game, distracted by the spectacle, cool guns, split-screen gameplay with my brothers, vehicle sections, la-di-da. I didn't even understand that the Chimera were technically not aliens. The virus was alien, yes, and it was sent via an asteroid by the pure Chimera, who are the true alien species. But the Chimera you fight against in all three games are human, and some animals too. Which brings me to the most underappreciated aspect of the franchise. The lore is so good. In fact, it carries most of it, especially in the part where the story falls flat. The lore is so juicy that it keeps me thinking about the series to this day, whether it be the believable and constant evolution of the Chimera throughout the plot, or little lore tidbits like how the President of the United States was prepared to doom the rest of the world in exchange for peace with the Chimera. This lore deserves more of a spotlight. In an oversaturated genre of alien invasion stories, this is one of the most refreshing takes. It also keeps it mysterious by never revealing what the pure Chimera look like, even in the finale of the third game, with the exception of fossils buried in the earth. I'm talking about live ones. Having the pure chimera be present during the Jurassic period of Earth, long before man, and then driven out by another mysterious alien faction that we still know next to nothing about, even after 3 mainline games and 2 spin-offs. The developers could have taken the tropey approach by having the chimera invade from space, but they chose the more unique angle by making them send the virus by asteroid to convert the humans, dig up old chimeran technology from deep within the Earth, and prepare the world for the eventual return of the pure chimera. Take a shot every time I say chimera in this video. These are the broad strokes, but there are so many more intricacies to the lore that I could get into, but even that premise on its own is captivating. The child version of me didn't know how good he had it. If I had the balls to follow my original calling, which was to be a director and screenwriter, there are 2 movie adaptations I'd pitch to Sony. One would be an animated Bloodborne movie in the animation style of Netflix's Castlevania. I promise you, I had this idea in my mind long before Jacksepticeye came out with his confirmed animated movie. And the second would be a live-action Resistance. I believe a Resistance movie or HBO show would be incredible. When the ugly brown 2000s filter isn't holding the games back, the art direction can be mesmerizing. There's so much iconography to pull from. Also, with the exception of Resistance 3, the story didn't get the full focus it could have in order to maximize the juicy drama that can arise from these situations, such as Nathan Hale's inevitable transformation into the second Daedalus. In the second half of Resistance 2, Hale's fate becomes sealed when he's unable to take his virus inhibitor, meaning he becomes a time bomb. Yet, he persists to defeat Daedalus and destroy the Chimeran Tower at the pure expense of himself. However, the game doesn't really take advantage of that by having him contemplate his struggle or show any remorse or just about anything dramatic. Nothing really affects him in the plot, the death of his squad or the complete destruction of his homeland. He remains pretty one note until the end when he's completely converted. And I always found this moment harrowing as hell. The same goes for Joseph Cabelli. He's the angry tough guy trope, giving Hale hell for 90% of the story, practically itching for the moment to kill Hale before he turns, until the end where he's finally faced with that very moment, and now he's reluctant and remorseful, having come to respect Hale. This character moment actually does make total sense, but unfortunately the context is left to implication and off-screen knowledge, rather than a fully fleshed out character journey progressing as the story does. Thankfully, Capelli would get his character fully actualized when he became the protagonist of Resistance 3, which finally put the story at the forefront, not just the plot and gameplay. To finish my point on lore, I missed out on a lot of it back then because I was only focused on what was in front of me. There were major things happening in the background that went over my head, like the Henry Stillman story. A radio newscaster whose broadcasts play throughout Resistance 2. He describes the events of the invasion as his psyche slowly crumbles with each entry, making him resort to alcoholism and eventually come to the conclusion that humanity has lost. These radio entries are so well acted, and it's our only real window into the civilian perspective as the US crumbles. And the thing is, Stillman isn't wrong. Humanity does lose. By Resistance 3, 90% of the world's population was wiped out, whether by conversion or death. It's these little background stories and this bleak ending to Resistance 2 that makes this series stand out compared to its peers. It's not afraid to embrace the crushing darkness that an invasion of this scale would entail. Side note, I adore when games give us stylized recaps like this. I still come back to watch the Resistance 3 version every now and then. Something about the artwork and the foreboding music combo is perfect. Style is all over these games. This is not your run-of-the-mill Halo killer generic shooter number 57. Resistance has a distinct identity, and I hope there comes a time where Sony realizes that. We've got lore, we've got style. I suppose now is a good time as any to talk about the gameplay. Now at first glance, these can be labelled as purely shooting galleries, which admittedly does make up a lot of their gameplay. But what keeps them relatively fresh is A. The incredible arsenal, every wacky weapon having an alternate fire mode which can create unique ways to deal with enemies, and they get more and more creative, especially by the third game. B. The horror influence, especially body horror, adding to the dread in certain locations. C. The vehicle sections in the first game. And D. The unique enemy design which gets more creative as the games go on. It's far from perfect though. One big point of contention was Resistance 2 dropping the weapon wheel, and instead only allowing 2 weapons, which was the standard of shooters at the time. Thankfully, 3 brought back the weapon wheel, and it's no coincidence that it has my favourite arsenal and gunplay. Oh, and one thing I want to mention before I forget. All 3 Resistance games are really effective at depicting scale. The Chimera always feel overwhelming and extremely dangerous. They can also feel unfair at many points though, especially in Resistance 2. This game really struggled with balance the most. In fact, Resistance 2 dropped the ball in a few ways, losing the weapon wheel and campaign co-op, whilst creating many frustrating encounters. Yet I grow more and more fascinated with the game the more I think of it. Its art style, despite being covered with that ugly filter, the crazy lore, the dark ending, it all speaks to me. Let's just say, doing a ranking will be harder than first thought. One thing that blows the other two games out of the water is Resistance 2's 60-player multiplayer and 8-player co-op mode. I was fortunate enough to catch the end of its lifecycle before the servers shut, and man, the multiplayer was chaotic in the best kind of way. Alright, this video is going on longer than I planned, so let me quickly sum up what I love about each of the three games. Follow Man, its punchy introduction to this alternate history world. I love its mockumentary-style narrative and the intersplice of vehicle sections. Resistance 2. As I've already sort of mentioned, I love the iconography, the setting, the music, the ending, and the fact that this is where the lore and mystery is at its most captivating. Resistance 3. Although at the time I didn't like it, I now love its crushingly bleak apocalyptic atmosphere. You really feel the weight of humanity's loss in this game. It's also nice to have characters to emotionally connect with. When playing Resistance 2 for the first time, I never would have believed that this one-note hothead would be a character I grew to care about. I enjoy Capelli as a protagonist and would love to see him again. And with that, let me conclude this video with questions directed towards myself. Do I want a Resistance 4? Absolutely I do. There is so much untapped potential here, and many mysteries still lingering. The Chimera are too interesting of an enemy faction to leave in the dust. Do I think we'll get a Resistance 4? No. A leaked document a few years ago detailed that Insomniac Games were excited to bring Resistance back, but the pitch was rejected by Sony. I only found out about this the other day, and it was a crushing blow. The only way I could see Sony considering a new entry is if they bring this trilogy back in some form and it garners attention from new and old fans. Do I think a Resistance 4 is necessary? Not necessarily. Screw it. Bring the Chimera as Helldivers 2's fourth faction. Who cares? I'm joking, of course. But I'm not joking about bringing Resistance to Helldivers 2 as the next legendary Warbond crossover. I would love to see Resistance' arguably most iconic weapon, the Bullseye, make an appearance. I know it's a cliched sentiment at this point, but Resistance deserves so much more. The bare minimum would be to remaster the trilogy, hopefully getting rid of those visual eyesores from the era. Hilariously, as I was making the script, a rumor popped up this week regarding Sony. It's a rumor that they're finally revisiting old IP, namely Infamous. So if this turns out to be true, it would make my rant earlier in the video feel weirdly coincidental. But rumors are rumors, nothing's confirmed, I'm not going to treat it as fact. If you watched the video to this point and haven't played any Resistance game, wow, thank you for sticking around. I'd be curious if I enticed you to the series even slightly. For the rest of you, thanks for watching, you take it easy out there.